Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Oxford Business Insights podcast. And I'm delighted to welcome Mike Lawton, who's the co-founder of Oxford Dynamics, amongst other things, to the podcast. Mike, welcome, and thank you for sparing us the time.
Hi, Nick. Yeah, and thanks for inviting me along.
Excellent. Well, for those, I'm sure many will know Mike Lawton. He's a serial entrepreneur, co-founder, as I said, of Oxford Dynamics, but he's also been involved in Oxford Space Systems and various other advanced technology companies. So we've got a lot to learn from Mike. And we're going to be talking about things from perhaps space, embedded intelligence. Mike's always been ahead of the curve, and I'm particularly interested in how Oxford Dynamics is reshaping AI to work in a sort of a transparent, responsible and secure basis, which I know for many people, whether you're leading edge or just using regular AI applications, I'm sure that's a concern for a lot of people. So with that as a bit of a background, tell us, Mike, what led you to found Oxford Dynamics, and tell us a little bit about your background.
Well, I founded Oxford Dynamics when I exited Oxford Space Systems. I stood down as CEO just after 6 years in the hot seat after founding that business back in 2013. I think what really enjoy doing is spotting high value niche opportunities that have very high technical barriers to entry, because that's great at blocking competitors, growing those to an operational scale. And then I guess stepping aside and letting people that enjoy running a more operational business
Yep.
while I go and spot the next opportunity. But of course, making sure I keep my shares in those businesses that I
Absolutely.
start, and then kind of on to the next one. So really, it was seeing where defense and security was heading, this need to embrace innovation and disruption, and the old order of business as usual, as I could see, was changing rapidly in space,
Yep.
that I could see starting to be echoed and replicated across wider defense and security. So that was one of the underlying motivations for Oxford Dynamics.
Excellent. And so it was founded in 2020, and a lot has changed. Not least we've been through a pandemic, but also in the defence and security environment, a lot has changed in just the last 4 or 5 years. So how do you bring that together in terms of your thinking, and with obviously an entrepreneurial spirit with some of the technology? How did you identify this AI platform you built, which we'll talk a little bit more about in a moment?
Well, I think if most founders are honest, there's a huge mixture of luck, along with any claimed smartness or brilliance. And I would say in my case, it was a huge amount of luck that I met my co-founders.
Yeah.
Shafali Sharma worked with me at Oxford Space Systems and was immensely impressed by the sheer volume of energy as well as technical smarts that she brought to the table. And I thought, if ever there was a chance to found a business in future,
Yeah.
again, I'd love to have Shafali as part of that team. And she very quickly introduced me to Dr. Eddie Jackson, who was just finishing his PhD, his postdoc research at Oxford University
Right.
in AI. And of course, meeting Eddie and brainstorming with him, very quickly the light bulb started going on about where we could start applying artificial intelligence. And Eddie at the time had actually just secured a grant from the Defense and Security Accelerator, DASA. He had aspirations to go and start his own business, but very quickly managed to convince him, don't go and start your own business, join Shafali and myself. And, I can provide some of that hard-won commercial experience around it, as well as a very strong hardware background. And I guess the Holy Trinity came together. The three legs of the stool were brought together in 2020. And that was really the genesis. And very quickly, really building on Eddie's research, we spotted where
Right.
some of those niches might lie and where the gaps were lying with current approaches by the MOD and the security and defense community.
And just before we move on to some of the specific products, just give us a little taste of before Oxford Space Systems. What was your sort of scientific and commercial sort of background before you went into sort of launching your own companies?
Um, I have a degree in electrical electronic engineering, so I'm a hardware engineer by training and I've always been fascinated with space technology. I think,
Mhm.
like a lot of people of my vintage, I grew up on a diet of Doctor Who and first generation Star Trek and had aspirations, to fly a spaceship. But of course, technology hadn't quite advanced that far. So if I couldn't fly one, perhaps I could get involved in designing them.
Right.
So my first ever graduate position was as a spacecraft power systems design engineer. But I became fascinated by the commercial side of business. And I could see even if you had a killer technology, even if you were better than your competitors, that was no guarantee of success. So more and more became interested in the commercial side and strategy underpinning a business and started getting that my own entrepreneurial itch. So Oxford Dynamics is company number 4. So
Right.
my first company really started exploring things in the area of biofuels. Believe it or not, it was
Hmm.
called Regenetech, and I rode the drive for low carbon. Way back in the early 90s, we suddenly decided we had an environment worth caring about, and carbon was identified as the chief culprit, and biofuels, biodiesel was all the rage. And I actually came up with an idea of how we could sidestep the cost and the overhead of making biodiesel and get very large industrial diesel engines to run on pure plant oils, or PPOs as they were called, and managed to grow that business. Had some customers in the UK, did a joint venture in India, which led me to becoming green entrepreneur in India, which was a fascinating award to get, and grew that business. But I learned very quickly you can't control market forces, and we had a huge backlash against biofuels, and quite rightly in some cases, the biofuel industry was being accused of leveling rainforests to grow palm
Okay.
oil. You may remember some of this press.
Yeah.
We weren't doing any of that. We were actually using waste oils, and actually, the Green Entrepreneur Award in India was because we were actually growing a weed that produced oil on abandoned farmland. So we couldn't have been further from the truth of leveling rainforest. But that was too complex a story, I think, for the media.
Yeah.
So huge backlash against that particular business. So we ended up selling the technology to a lead customer. So that was a great lesson in entrepreneurship for
Yeah.
me. The next business, which was starting as Regenetech, was going through selling its technology. Actually built on an idea that I had while I was at university. I was working my way through university behind a bar. I think a lot of people do that, a way of earning money, and I became fascinated with beer quality amongst other things. And I was just amazed that and we've all done this
Yeah.
probably, you're in a bar, shall we stay for another drink? Now let's go next door. So what triggered that? Now let's go next door. Was it related to beer quality? So long story short is, yeah, part of the psychology is you didn't particularly fully enjoy that drink. So I designed and developed an intelligent flow meter that could be retrofitted behind the bar that gave unique insights into product quality, and ended up selling the technology to Heineken,
Oh,
Guinness,
wow.
and a whole bunch of other brand owners. This is way before Wi-Fi and high-speed
Yeah.
broadband. I had a whole bunch of old dial-up modems, and I haggled a deal with the phone operators that I could use the network between 2 and 5 o'clock in the morning, and I could shift as much data as I could on old dial-up modems to a stack of old Pentium PCs, and essentially crunch this data to give the brand owners their first ever dispense quality management
Wow.
reports the
Okay.
following day, and built that business up and sold that one as well.
Excellent. Well, that's quite a varied. Although your modern reputation is in extra space and very high tech AI and robotics, which we'll come on to. But I didn't. I've got to admit, I didn't know about the beer side of it and the biofuels either. So it's a really fascinating background. I'm sure you learn about business a lot in that process, as well as obviously about the products you're developing. Okay, well let's come back to the current time. I think I'm right in saying your AI platform is called AVIS, AVIS, and tell us a little bit about that and how is it different from typical AI that people are becoming increasingly used to using to one level or another.
Yeah, well, AVIS stands for a very intelligent system. It's a riff on Jarvis from
Yeah,
Iron Man for all
yeah,
Marvel Universe fans. And the way it differentiates itself is when most people say they're using AI, invariably it's probably a large language model.
Yep.
Chat GPT obviously is the most famous one. Um, and as most people have probably found, yeah, they're pretty good. You can get them to do some very, very useful work. But you can't really trust the output. You could probably trust it for a banana cake recipe, but you really shouldn't base any life-changing
Yep.
decisions on the output of a large language model. And the reason for that, it's no real surprise, of course, something like ChatGPT and its competitive models are basically trained on the entirety of the internet. I don't think anybody's going to stand up and say the internet is full of high integrity, high quality, accurate information.
Absolutely.
So, what a surprise! Large language models reflect the general quality of information across the internet. But what they have shown is an incredibly enticing way of interacting with vast volumes of data, these very almost eerie natural language conversations that we can have with something like a large language model. So what we've done with Avis is let's take that ability of a large language model to communicate in a very human, natural way, but let's solve the problems of what we call hallucination. Not only is the output of a large language model a function of the quality of the data going into it, a large language model on its own, if it doesn't know the answer, it can't say, I don't know the answer. It literally will make up an answer. This is one of the bizarre facets of when you put billions and billions of nodes together in a neural network, we start to see emergent properties like hallucination. And they become very nefarious. And there's certainly some cases that have hit headlines in the UK in the last few weeks. The legal profession is pushing back on lawyers using large language models because not only will it make up an answer, they're incredibly good at making up their own references.
Yep.
So we have cases of people going to court, citing case history, and then referring to all the reference case law, which has all been completely made up. And obviously, you can't possibly rely on just a large language model for national security and defense. So what we've done with Avis, yes, we take a large language model, but our intellectual property lies in how do we just use that ability to talk in a natural language way and all the heavy lifting of ingesting data, verifying its accuracy, and avoiding hallucination is essentially where the smarts of Avis comes in. And of course, we don't just output the data in a written form. You can imagine in national security and defense, it could be very visual outputs we're
Yep.
looking for. It could be a hybrid, it could be a combination, it could be tabular data we're looking for. So we can cope with a vast range of what we call modes of data input. It could be text, images, sound, whatever. And then we can translate that into whatever answer mode our customer is looking for. And uniquely, we provide very accurate references and we show our end users how they can go away and verify the source information that we were working on. And if Avis doesn't know an answer, it will simply say, I have insufficient information to answer that question.
Interesting, very, very interesting. And do you see? I can absolutely understand the application in something like national security, but clearly, is that a solution to the wider weaknesses of the? Let's use ChatGPT as an example, but there's clearly others working in the legal field as well. Could that be applied in those areas as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So we think we now have, or we know we have a very interesting scalable platform technology that we can operate at enterprise level, literally up to top secret data classification. So any highly regulated industry
Right.
that will requires the ingesting of potentially very highly sensitive information, that could be obviously customer data,
Yep.
customer records, and cannot tolerate incorrect or hallucinated answers. So we think applications in legal, finance, pharma, etc.
Absolutely. I know. I'm just without going off down a rabbit hole. I mean, it's can it apply that logic to sort of the news world where there's well, we all know there's a lot of fake news out there, to coin a phrase. Could it be applied at that sort of level, or does it have to have sort of something specific and referenceable to actually do that?
No, that's a great question. So Avis can ingest archive information, but
Right.
also it can ingest real-time information. So an input to Avis could be, the BBC News website, it could be Sky News, and it could be social media feeds as
Right.
well. And then you could set Avis the task of summarizing general sentiment, say across 1,000 different social media feeds. So what we're trying to do is not replace humans, humans always stay in the decision-making loop. What we're trying to do is do what a human can't, which is cognitively ingest vast amounts of information
Yeah.
and attempt to summarize it or reference it in a way that the human brain simply can't reference. There's no way you could cross-reference, say, 100,000 documents, but that's exactly what a neural network can do in silicon.
Okay.
So the smart bit of AVIS, we think, is how we always keep the human in the loop and keep them confident
Yeah.
about the answers AVIS is giving, but always powerfully giving them the ability to go back and cross-reference any of this information.
Yeah, and I think it's giving humans that sort of confidence in terms of how they interact with AI is very significant. Just thinking of myself, for example, if it's text and words, I'm fairly confident I will spot if AI has spat out something that's incorrect. Even though I'm a market researcher by trade and quite used to dealing with numbers and data, I am nervous about the outputs because I'm probably not sophisticated enough to spot where something has gone wrong. And so as a human, you default to where your natural tendencies are. That's really interesting. So look, I know you've told us about AVIS. We know it's working in national security matters. Are you able to tell us about where it's actually made an impact in the real world to date?
Yes, the biggest application I think most people will have heard about that's made the news is the UK's Strategic Defence Review, or the SDR. The government, Labour government, ordered a complete review of current spending strategy and essentially what the UK should be focusing on spending on
Yep.
its money, spending its defence money on for the next 10 years. That was announced in June, and they set various analysts and government ministers the task of delivering that by end of May, early June this year, so in less than a year. And that task was beyond the cognitive capabilities of the resource available. You can appreciate
Yeah.
incredibly sensitive information to secret and top secret. There's only so many analysts in the UK that you could bring together to go through
Yeah.
that type of data. But simply the volume of data we were expecting these guys to get through was simply overwhelming. Hundreds of thousands of documents, many, many millions of words. Often a lot of the information could be conflicting, some of it in error. So we secured a contract from the UK government to demonstrate the capabilities of AVIS. And on passing some of the toughest technical due diligence we've ever been through, AVIS was selected as the tool to help with the SDR. So this is the first time the government has used generative AI technology to assist in such important national review. So what a huge responsibility, but a huge credibility stamp for Oxford Dynamics and our team that we were able to provide and assist the government with the SDR.
Excellent. I mean, that's really quite something, and in a relatively short space of time. But I think also for the general public, yeah, they hear about things like strategic defence reviews, but unless you've been in there, the fact, not just by security clearance, but also just by the number of people that are capable and trusted to actually look at the data, is probably pretty limited. I don't know. I'd imagine, is it less than 100? I'd have thought in terms of. I'm not asking you to give away numbers, but it's not a lot of people that, and even 100 people working flat out probably couldn't cope with all that amount of data in a year.
Yeah, I can confirm it's a lot less than 100 people. I
Okay.
think people will be surprised at just how small the
Yeah.
team is because not everybody can abandon every other bit of work they're
No.
doing at national security and defense importance. So the actual team available was surprisingly small, and therefore they needed a different type of a way of approaching this problem. And obviously,
Okay.
AI offered one of those potential tools.
And so essentially the role was to bring and present the data sets to those people that were qualified to distill it. Yeah, Avis didn't write the report,
No.
but it brought all the data together so that people could see that in however they wanted to look at it, from various people, from I presume defence manufacturers through to strategists to admirals to frontline soldiers, whoever it was, as well as politicians and presumably members of the public as well.
Yes, there was a large public consultation as well. So literally, it was ingesting from literally just a handful of words for the shortest public response, right through to documents running to several thousand
Yeah.
words from senior ministers and those currently serving in the forces. So we had a very wide-ranging length of material, different types of materials. Some was actually in tabular and graphical form, a lot of text, obviously predominantly text, but even images in
Yeah.
some cases. So how do we ingest this vast reservoir of information and then provide an environment whereby analysts can be very confident about asking and querying questions, getting the cross references they're looking for, and obviously looking for where information conflicts with each
Yeah.
other. No real surprise, senior people in the Army and Navy perhaps disagree with those in the Air Force. So where are those conflicts in
Some
information
things
and
will never
strategy?
change.
Yeah. And it comes back to the problem with the large language model. It would not be able to differentiate and show those differences in opinion. It
Yeah.
would simply it would attempt to summarize the majority of information, whereas AVIS is allowed to tease out and able to tease out all these different opinions and highlight them and then show where these different opinions can be found.
Excellent. And clearly, you spoke about defence, but I can see it in terms of healthcare. There must be a massive opportunity in healthcare, whether it's just within NHS data or internationally in terms of plugging all sorts of different data sets together.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got a fantastic platform tool, but like any small company, it really is about focus and
Yeah.
delivery. We could chase 1,000 different
Yeah,
directions.
absolutely.
We do have some conversations at a very nascent level running with the NHS, but as you might imagine, it's characterized by being highly bureaucratic and fragmented. So I think we're quite a way before the NHS is going to widely
So
adopt
even,
AVIS,
even
but
Oxford Dynamics is on the waiting list.
I think so, yeah. But yeah, ultimately, it would seem bizarre and strange for the NHS and other entities not to use this type of
Yeah.
technology, whether it comes from us and Avis. But ultimately, they're such powerful tools when developed correctly that we can save vast amounts of money and massively improve efficiency and reduce human error by
Yeah.
embracing appropriate use of AI.
Okay. Right. Well, that has been fascinating about Avis, but it's not all you do. I know you do embedded intelligence and robotics. Could you tell us a little bit about that? Because that application is fascinating too. But and kind of where did that come from? Was it the same because you were working on Avis? Did the robotics fall out of it, or is it just give us a bit of background?
Well, I'm a hardware nut at heart.
Yeah,
I
you said
like
you're yeah.
I like to see things that kind of
Yeah.
move and make a noise. So, um, where my co-founders and myself see the great advantage is, I guess, look, anybody can write inefficient code. You can write pretty bloaty AI, but that comes at a price. You need to host it, and there's a
Yeah.
huge environmental cost of the carbon required to process ChatGTP, for instance.
Yeah.
So we became quite fascinated. How do we get the same result, but massively improve the efficiency? And if you're improving the efficiency of your algorithms, well, why do we need to run them in the cloud on expensive cloud hardware? Can we get them so efficient we could run them on battery-powered devices? And what about mobile battery-powered devices, things like robots? So ultimately, what we call embedded intelligence, can we bring the intelligence of something like Avis and embed it on a mobile machine,
Hmm.
such that ultimately you can have natural language conversations with complex machines and get them to reliably carry out complex operations in a very trustworthy and explainable manner. And that's the task we set ourselves. And we're taking some very, very positive and progressive steps along that journey with our robot called Strider.
Hmm.
So Strider is a robot that we're developing for end customer DEFRA,
Okay.
supported by the Defense and Science Tech Labs, DSTL. And this all came about because of the attack in Salisbury
Yeah.
by Russia and the Novichok incident that we had. And at the time, our only response was to send people in white bunny suits and thick rubber gloves and kind of hope for the best against nerve agents. DEFRA, in their wisdom, were looking at developments in robotics and thought, is there a way we can actually send machines in as first responders in these sorts of incidents? And Oxford Dynamics secured a contract to develop quite a unique robot to demonstrate that we can, in fact, do that. So Strider is a robot that can be sent into an area beyond line of sight
Yeah.
It can carry out very detailed mapping and reconnaissance to understand what that threat might be using quite advanced machine vision. If the operator wants to recover an object from that environment, Strider can do that. You may remember with Novichok, it was actually a perfume bottle
Yeah.
that ended up being the vector. So Strider can pick up a whole range of objects. It can also take swab samples. It can obtain liquid samples. It can even take a core sample to about 6 inches depth in the ground. These get sealed in a forensic level environment, so we can bring those samples back to the operators for analysis in a lab. And then, if deemed necessary, Strider can perform its third function, which is precision decontamination. So
Okay.
Strider can spray under street furniture, in arches. It can follow very complex contours to spray a recognized decontaminant to make the area safe before we send humans in. And our brief was it had to do that continuously for 8 hours, and it had to be able to tow up to 300 kilograms or 300 liters of decontamination fluid and
Okay.
operate reliably beyond line of sight. And we achieved that. We went from a blank sheet of paper to a demonstrated prototype working in just over 10 months to show the
Very
pace
good.
of development.
And again, one can imagine a number of a wide range of potential applications of that. But do you think that sort of application is where that is leading the technology? Where if you get it right for that, that will widen the market for you.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think use cases are actually starting to emerge. In fact, we think landmine detection and neutralization is an obvious application for Strider because we
Yeah.
have pretty advanced machine vision system on there. And if we attach a ground penetrating radar,
Yeah.
we have a very, very interesting and useful tool that rather than sending humans in with metal detectors, we
Yeah.
can start to send robotic detection equipment in that could clear an area initially autonomously, but ultimately completely autonomously is the target. So I'd be disappointed if ultimately, when the war between Russia and Ukraine subsides and people are now trying to clear some pretty nasty areas of land.
Yeah.
For me, I think personal success would to have a number of Strider robots being deployed to help with that.
Very good. And do you see that those sort of applications? Do you get competition from around the world? Are you leading edge? I mean, I don't. I'm not pretending to know that particular market, but there are other people thinking.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So the current way of doing it, the Army call it their wheelbarrow, and it's a pretty basic remotely operated robot, normally tethered operation. So you've still got a human operator
Right.
in line of sight of the robot. It does have advantages. The more simple you make these machines, the easier they are to repair
Yeah.
in field. But of course, you have a lot of limitations. You don't have advanced machine vision on them.
Yeah.
So I think there's a very careful balance to be made between over engineering a really expensive
Yeah.
solution that if it triggers a landmine, you've suddenly blown up a really expensive asset versus having something so basic that it's still got a lot of downsides. So I think that's what we're exploring. We
Yeah.
think Strider perhaps sits in that sweet spot. Closest competition, apart from very low cost, what we call the wheelbarrow, some pretty complex solutions coming from the US that are perhaps twice to three times the cost of
Right.
Strider. So we think we can hit that price point and functionality balance with this type of technology.
Excellent. And in terms of your time, if you go in on a Monday morning and you had a choice of a couple of hours, would you be doing the robotics or would you be doing the AI?
If only it was Monday morning, I was there over the weekend as well. I think, like most founders, there's no such thing as a weekend. You
Yeah.
muck in as needs to be done. Um, I guess I'm a hardware nut at heart. So
Right.
if you had to say, Mike, yeah, you've got one tool, you're going to go and tinker with some AI, you're going to go and tinker with a robot. I'd probably go and tinker with the robot, but very quickly get a bit frustrated that I need more AI in
I
this.
need
Let's make it more
AI to make it
intelligent.
better. Yeah. Okay. Good one. Now, if we can shift gear slightly to us, or shift our focus. Really interested to you as an entrepreneur and somebody who's built successful businesses and sold them. I think one of the most frequently asked questions is why it seems to me that the UK is very good at getting innovative technology launched off the ground to a certain size, but almost inevitably, once it gets up to, I don't know exactly what the figure is, but it seems to me it's probably somewhere between 100 and 500 million pound sort of turnover roughly. it gets sold, and almost inevitably that's an American company that picks out one of the big tech guys. Could you give us a is that an inevitability just because of the way the tech industry or the economic power of the US? Is it an issue here with the way we view our companies? Give me your thoughts on that because you're somebody who's kind of been through that process. You've got some fantastic technology, and I'm sure you've got some insight and views on that.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It comes back, I think, ultimately to the motivation of the founder or founders. Why are they starting the business? If it's about how do you achieve the highest liquidity event, how do you exit for the maximum amount of value, then sadly, there's very, very few entities around in the UK that could match the ticket price that a US or
Yeah,
foreign company is willing to pay. So if it is only about the money, then unfortunately, that is a sad eventuality. But I don't think most founders I meet actually want to go on that journey. But as I'm sure you realize and listeners realize, along that journey of growing a company, invariably you bring in external capital.
yeah,
Founders' shareholding gets diluted, and very quickly, it's not unusual just to have typical equity investors that are there to maximize the return. So even if the original founding team absolutely want to keep this as a sovereign capability, unfortunately, your voting rights are unfortunately
yeah,
diminished, and those that are in it just to make money will invariably take the biggest check they can get on the table. So I think to solve that problem is how do we allow founders to stay more in control
yeah,
of their businesses? And that then comes back to mechanisms for supporting and growing UK tech startups. And I think the government has a huge amount of work to do in this area. It's great, actually, and this is not a direct criticism of the government. I think we've got one of the most supportive environments actually in the world to support founders to get business off the ground. Where more work needs to be done is supporting them through the so-called valley of death. Um, and I see this time and time again. It's so easy to secure that early stage funding, and perhaps some would argue too easy. So you can start your company, you can go through the prototype development cycle, but then when you get to that working prototype, where's the end user? Where's the customer pool? That just evaporates. So I think the way we structure funding in the UK needs a major overhaul. Rather than just having a monitoring officer assigned by Innovate UK or DASA or DSTL, we need a commercial exploitation
yeah,
monitoring officer assigned, someone who is assisting with that end user pool that's constantly making sure that company isn't just designing something that's shiny and cool, it's actually solving a real end customer problem. And if they hit the particular metrics of success, that end user will engage.
yeah,
So I think that's a big piece that's missing. And also what I see in the US that is missing from the UK is the government should step up to be a foundation customer.
yeah.
It just doesn't do that. Whereas we do see that with the US government. It starts to pick its winners and it supports its tech companies to become these very large, globally recognized names. So I think the government can do a huge amount more by stepping up to the plate and being that first customer to
Yeah.
nurture the technology.
No, I hear that. And do you think, obviously you mentioned the US, but do you think other sort of middle-sized economies like ours have governments that do the French and German governments, for example, back their technology companies better than we do, or is
Yeah, I think the French government is a better customer for its tech
well,
companies than the UK. But once again, there's certain deficiencies. No European country is the perfect
no,
environment. You can cherry pick some great areas, but then you'll find some significant deficiencies. I generally think overall, the UK is the best place for certainly for a tech founder to start that business. Sadly, and I've met a few founders that do this, they come over from the US specifically because it's pretty easy to get this low TRL funding.
yeah,
They'll use UK taxpayers' money to burn down that initial technical risk and then reincorporate in the US and raise the large VC investment in the US. So we have, I
yeah.
guess, entrepreneurial tourists coming to take advantage of our support environment and then going back.
And just taking a slightly different tack, do you find, being in Oxford or maybe Cambridge or those sort of areas, do you think the infrastructure to launching a business is as good as it could be in and around Oxford now for yourself and other tech businesses?
Yeah, I think Oxfordshire is an incredibly privileged position to be in. We have, three, four, five very large technology campuses,
Yeah.
a lot of support from the government. You can rent office space and lab space literally on a rolling per month
Yeah.
basis in some of these incubators. And that's an all-in price. Being less than an hour from London by train, that means the investment community from London and including customers are willing to travel. I joke and say most investors are lazy. If they have to travel more than an hour, you can forget it. So you've got to live pretty close to your
Yeah.
investors. And of course, Oxfordshire itself has a very healthy high net worth individual
Yeah.
business angel network as well. So the location is great. We can get access to literally cutting edge labs and premises. The investment community is there. So all those fundamentals are in place to start and found and grow a business, but that doesn't solve the value of death problem.
Yeah. Absolutely. Okay, well that's really interesting, and I think something that we're going to have to hope that the investors and the government work on in years to come, because otherwise we're going to lose some companies that perhaps could have been built into seriously large companies in this country. Just before we wrap up, I would like to talk to you about you as a manager or a director of a company. How do you go about building your team? You spoke very clearly about your co-founders in terms of that level, but presumably you bring in other people as you go along. How do you sort of recruit and identify the type of talent you need? I'm sure there's some that is sort of the academic qualifications, but also the type of people that are going to come into a fast-moving business like yours might not suit everybody, even if they've got the qualifications.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And invariably, like a lot of startups, it's always a compromise.
Yeah,
You can't pay the Premier League salaries of a very large incumbent, but what you can do is offer an incredibly exciting, fast-moving environment where we literally embrace risk. We can take risks that large competitors just won't entertain. So that appeals to a certain mindset. Invariably, it tends to be people at the start of their career or younger engineers that have still got a
yeah,
fire in their belly, keen to embrace risk, less concerned about career risk,
yeah,
more about wanting to work on exciting technologies that are cutting edge. So I think, like a lot of startups, the demographic of the workforce tends to be very young or
yeah,
biased towards being quite young. And it's those focused towards research and development. But then as a business starts to mature, and this is exactly what Oxford Dynamics is, you now have the revenue to start bringing in more senior talent, and you now add much more structure and discipline around the business. And it's what we've done at Oxford Space Systems. So you transfer more from being an R&D business more to an operational business. But of course, we want to keep that key competitive advantage alive. We don't want to stifle with bureaucracy. We want to reward innovation and risk taking rather than condemn it and punish it, which tends to be the case in large companies.
yeah,
And I think as we grow, it's going to be that balance. We will always have those people that are much more comfortable working in the kind of sandbox environment of
yeah,
R&D, but then you recruit more operational type engineers that want to focus on quality, repeatability, delivery, compliances that we need in place to achieve repeated product sales. So we're just starting to transition
yeah.
to that and hiring more senior folks as I speak.
Okay, and I know you have a sort of you mentioned before that the integrity around the AVIS product, but you very much have a philosophy of not building technology that harms the planet as well. To build in a sustainable way as is feasible, and I can hear that with the AI you're trying to put on the mobile devices or robotics. So, is that attractive to some people?
Yeah, very much so. So yes, when you say that you work in security and defense, it's not uncommon
Yeah,
for people to think automatically you're building things that go bang and kill people. And and that's exactly not what we do. And you're absolutely right. The ethos of Oxford Dynamics is never to design technology or systems that kill people or harm the planet. And a couple of technologies that we've talked about today, Strider being used
yeah,
for incident response, landmine detection removal. That's what we operate in that area when
yeah,
we talk about security and defense. And of course, young people generally want to do good in the world. They don't want to come and work for a company that is trying to harm people or the planet. So we align generally very well, actually, with those seeking a career. And I think what we're now seeing, certainly in the investment community, is actually rather than a rejection of security and defense, embracing it
Yeah.
as huge areas of opportunity. But we still have a lot of work to do in making that sector more transparent and attractive. But we certainly have no problems in hiring folks at the moment.
And I understand that you support some people maybe looking for sort of internships or summer students, etc. So you feel that there's a sort of a wider mission to get. Would you go as far as schools and STEM subjects in schools?
Yeah, literally, we've just finished with our first STEM student at Oxford Dynamics, a young lad of 15,
Yeah.
was with us for just over a week. That went really well. He went away absolutely buzzing about robots and AI. And in fact, next week we have a 14-year-old girl joining us for her week out in industry. And as we grow, Oxford Dynamics very keen to put in apprenticeship scheme as well as I did at Oxford Space Systems. I am an ex-apprentice myself,
Yeah.
so I know the value of these schemes, these more vocational type approaches to getting into engineering. So yeah, very keen on supporting STEM and apprenticeships. And I think any company that has enjoyed government support, government grants, for me, there's a moral duty there.
Yeah. Yeah.
You've enjoyed support of the public purse, so give something back. And so for
Absolutely.
me, that's how we do it by entertaining STEM engagement.
Okay. Well, Mike, that's been a tour de force about a remarkable career, but also the products and things that Oxford Dynamics are working on and the philosophies behind it. Just tell us, and I know there are certain restrictions on how open you can be about some of the things you're working on. But if somebody did have wanted to contact you, whether it is a project or employment or whatever, tell us the best way to get in contact and how people can learn more about you.
Well, hopefully there'll be a link from this podcast
Certainly
as
will.
well. But yeah, track me down on LinkedIn. Just search
Yeah.
for my name, Mike Lawton, and I'm normally pretty much near the top. And of course, find us at oxdynamics.com, oxdynamics.com.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for your time. So we've been from startups through science and technology applications, and even sovereignty and how what that can really mean in terms of looking after our future developing companies. So thank you very much for your time, Mike. I'm no doubt that people will have got an awful lot out of that, and I appreciate your business journey as well as the science and technology that you're working on. So thank you again.
Thanks, Nick. Thanks for the opportunity. It's been a real pleasure.